We'd been driving for a couple of hours, heading north out of Toronto, when the radio finally gave up. Static took over the station, and the usual noise filled the van. Dad didn't even bother trying to fix it, just reached over and turned the knob off. I glanced out the window at the trees crowding the highway, endless green blurring past. Dad tapped the steering wheel like he was keeping a beat, humming under his breath. His side of the van was cluttered with tools, wire cutters, ropes, coils of wire, and there were empty coffee cups scattered all over the floor. The seats behind us were stuffed tight with gear. There was barely any room left. "I can almost taste the pine out here," Dad said, grinning like a kid on Christmas morning. "Fresh air." I nodded, almost matching his enthusiasm, on the inside at least. The feeling of leaving the city was bliss. "So Steve's cottage," I said, fiddling with the hem of my sleeve. "That's what we're actually here for, not just camping." Dad smiled, eyes on the road. "Yeah, we're finishing up the wiring. Clean setup. It's gonna be cozy, but solid. And hey, I could use an extra hand." I grimaced. "Right, free labor." "Exactly," he laughed. "And maybe you'll pick up some tricks." The van rattled over a pothole, and I pulled my jacket tighter. I wanted to ask more, but the words got stuck. I'd lived with Mum, my stepdad, and my brother for years, so this was a nice break. A chance to get away from all the noise, the tension. We turned off the highway onto a narrow gravel road, the trees leaning over us like they wanted to shut us in. Dad's face softened. This was where he belonged. After a while, the road opened up to a clearing with a half-built cabin. Wood frames and insulation peeked through the scaffolding, but no windows yet. Tools were scattered around the porch. No sign of Steve. "Probably ran to get supplies," Dad said, stretching as he got out. I followed, trying to shake the nervous knot in my gut. The air smelled like pine needles and moss, like something ancient. I breathed it in. The cottage, or what was supposed to become a cottage, stood half-finished in the middle. Just a couple of plywood walls and a mess of tools scattered everywhere. Plastic tarps hung from the beams like loose skin. It didn't feel like a place where people were building something. It felt abandoned. Dad grinned and clapped his hands. "There she is, Steve's castle. 2 bedrooms and no plumbing. Luxury." I tried to smile, but something about the place felt off. The air was dead still. I mean, completely still. No birds, no bugs, no wind. Just the sound of Dad rummaging through bins and tarps rustling in a breeze that didn't exist. I stared at one of the tarps. One corner was flapping like crazy, even though the rest of it wasn't moving at all. I pointed at it. "Did you already hang that?" Dad glanced up, wiped sweat from his brow. "Nah, Steve probably tossed it up before he left." "Why?" I didn't know how to explain it. I just mumbled, "It's weird, that's all." He didn't press, just handed me a lighter and nodded toward the fire pit. "Why don't you get a fire going while I knock out some of the junction boxes?" I walked off toward the edge of the clearing, where a circle of stones marked the old fire pit. I cleared out the soggy ash and started stacking sticks. My hands were uncertain of what to do, but my eyes kept flicking to the tree line. It felt like someone was watching, not from the ground, higher, like from the trees themselves. I lit the fire. It sputtered, hissed, then caught. I sat back on my heels, listening to it crackle, trying to focus on the sound. But the silence around it swallowed everything. It didn't echo. The fire should have echoed off the trees, but it didn't. The sound felt trapped, like the forest was absorbing it. I glanced at Dad. He was in his element, drilling into a stud, humming off key. And then I saw something. Just for a second. Between the trees, a shape, tall, pale, gone. I blinked. Nothing there. Maybe just my brain playing tricks on me. Maybe just a trick of light. But my heart was pounding like I'd seen something real. That's when I heard the whistle. It was soft, high-pitched. Just 3 notes, like someone trying out a tune. It came from deep in the woods, too far to be Dad, too strange to be a bird. I stood up fast. Did you hear that? Dad looked up. Hear what? That whistle. He cocked his head, listening. Nothing now. He shrugged. Probably just wind or bird's bud. But there wasn't any wind. The leaves didn't move. The air didn't move. The tarp wasn't moving anymore either. I didn't say anything, just nodded and went back to the fire. Later, after the wiring was done and the fire was going strong, we ate hot dogs off green sticks and sat on overturned buckets. It should have been nice. It should have felt normal. Dad was telling me a story about the time he saw a gigantic turtle while he was canoeing, and about the time he encountered a massive bull moose when he came out of an outhouse. I tried to laugh along, and I think I even managed to. But the forest didn't laugh with us. When we stopped talking, the silence came back even heavier, and then I heard the whistle again. Closer this time. 3 notes, same pitch, not human, but not animal either. I stood up, my whole body tense. There it is again. Dad looked up, chewing. What? That whistle. He shook his head. You sure you're not just hearing wind in the trees? No wind, I said, maybe too sharply. He chuckled, then softened. You've got to learn how to relax, buddy. I didn't answer. I felt like something was watching us from just behind the tree line, something that didn't care if we saw it or not. We set up the tent in the dark. The nylon flapped while we hammered the stakes into the dirt. Dad cracked a joke about the sleeping bags still smelling like the last trip, like campfire and sweat, but I didn't laugh. When we climbed into the tent and zipped it shut, I lay awake a long time. The night pressed in, and from somewhere in the woods, I heard the whistle again. This time, it was only 2 notes. I'm not sure I ever really fell asleep. I must have drifted off at some point because I remember dreaming. Not normal dreams either, just blackness, and the sound of something breathing just inches from my face. Not loud, not aggressive, just long, slow breaths. In, outside, like it was waiting for me to wake up. When I opened my eyes, the tent was still dark. I couldn't tell what time it was. I didn't have a watch, and there was no light outside. Not from the moon, not from the stars, just blackness. Dad was snoring, low and steady beside me in his sleeping bag. I held my breath and listened for the whistle. Nothing. Just the faint rustle of trees. I started to relax. Then I heard it. Not the whistle. Something worse. Something moved outside. Leaves crunching softly under careful footsteps, circling the tent. I wanted to wake Dad. I wanted to scream. But something inside me knew, not from logic, but from instinct, that if I made a sound, whatever was out there would know exactly where I was in the tent. And it wanted me to make a sound. My hands were sweating. I pressed my fists against my chest to keep them from shaking. Something brushed the nylon wall behind my head. Just a faint pressure, like a fingertip dragging slowly along the fabric. Then, silence. I counted in my head, 1 to 60, over and over. Eventually, I must have passed out. When I opened my eyes again, sunlight was bleeding through the orange fabric of the tent. Dad was gone. I shot up so fast I got tangled in the sleeping bag and nearly fell. "Dad!" His voice came from the direction of the fire pit. "Morning, Bud. I didn't want to wake you." I unzipped the tent and stumbled out, squinting into the light. The fire was going again, and Dad was squatting beside it, cooking eggs in a dented pan. He looked totally fine. I opened my mouth to tell him, but stopped. He already thought I was an overthinker. He said it all the time, that my imagination needed a leash, that I let my head go to bad places too fast. So I just said, "I didn't sleep great." "First night always sucks," he said, flipping the eggs. "You get used to the animal sounds. Probably heard some deer or raccoons sniffing around the tent." I nodded. I didn't eat much breakfast. My stomach was twisted into a knot. Later, Dad got back to work inside the half-built cottage. Said he needed to finish mounting the panel so he could start running the circuits. I asked if I could go for a walk just to clear my head, and he said sure, as long as I stayed close. The forest looked different in the morning light, less threatening, but only just. There were no birds, no squirrels, no bugs in the air, just trees, towering, quiet trees, like the woods were holding back a secret they didn't want me to know yet. I walked toward the place where I thought I'd seen the figure the day before. There was no sign of it, just moss, ferns, and dry pine needles. But then I found something else. Footprints, not boot prints, bare feet, long, narrow, wrong. I crouched down and studied them. 5 toes, but too long, like fingers instead of toes. The arch was wrong too, too high, not human, not even close. Something cold prickled down my spine. I turned around, scanning the trees. No one there, but I couldn't shake the feeling that the trees were watching, not from behind them, from inside them. Like whatever was out here wasn't just in the forest, it was the forest. I walked back fast, maybe even ran. Dad was still working, lost in wires and outlet boxes. I didn't tell him what I saw. That night, the fire burned hotter, brighter. We sat closer together. I didn't ask if he'd heard something around the tent. I didn't bring up the footprints. But before we went to bed, Dad looked at me and said, "Hey, if you hear anything weird out there tonight, you wake me up. Got it?" I nodded, heart pounding. "Okay." Because in that moment, I realized something that made my stomach turn. He had heard it, and he hadn't said anything either. The next morning, I woke to the sound of voices, low, friendly, familiar. I crawled out of the tent and saw Dad laughing with Steve, already unloading a cooler from the back of his pickup. "Josh, look who showed up," Dad called. "Master of all things half-built." Steve grinned and waved. "So you're the apprentice, huh?" "Something like that," I mumbled, rubbing sleep from my eyes. By mid-morning, the smell of wood smoke and bacon filled the clearing. Steve had brought along a portable grill, and while he and Dad joked around with wires and conduit, he tossed thick-cut bacon strips onto the cast-iron grate, letting them crisp and curl in the fire's heat. He also had a little foil packet of garlic cloves, doused in oil and salt, sizzling away in the corner. We sat around the fire when it was done, eating straight from the grill. The bacon was smoky and salty and almost sweet, and the garlic, soft and golden, melted on my tongue like butter. I didn't even know garlic could taste like that. For a while, things felt normal. comfortable even. The smell of bacon, Dad's stories, Steve's booming laugh, it all pushed the nerves out of my head. But when I looked past the fire, into the dark spaces between the trees, something still felt off. Steve looked around nervously and then laughed it off. Later, when Steve left, Dad said, "That was a quick visit. He's got to take care of some things in the city." But I saw the way he looked over his shoulder at the trees on the walk back. That night, I swore I heard footsteps circling the tent. Soft, dragging, careful footsteps that didn't sound like a man walking. I held my breath and stayed still. The whistle came again, 3 notes, then 2, and then silence. I didn't sleep. The next morning felt wrong. Nothing specific, nothing I could name. But it was like waking up in a room where someone had just left. Someone who shouldn't have been there. Dad didn't say much as we stirred the fire back to life. His hands were moving slower than usual, stiffer, like he hadn't slept either. I didn't ask. We packed up our gear for the day. Tools, extension cords, a thermos of stale coffee, and headed over to the half-built cottage. The smell of fresh-cut pine still lingered around the exposed beams, but it couldn't cover the strange, wet rot in the air. Dad was muttering and swearing to himself while checking wires. "Wasn't like this yesterday," he said, crouching at the fuse box. "Whole lines chewed up. Fuck." I wandered out back, pretending to be bored, but every sense in my body was wired. I kept catching glimpses of movement in the trees, small flashes of pale limbs, long and thin, sliding between shadows just when I looked away. Sometimes I'd hear breathing, low and animal, but rhythmic. Sometimes I swore I heard my name, Josh, but now it sounded like it came from inside my own ears. By early afternoon, I noticed something else. The forest had changed. It wasn't obvious, not right away, but the trail back to the campfire seemed longer. The landmarks, boulders, dead stumps, trees with claw marks were in the wrong order, like the woods had rethreaded themselves around us. I found myself turning in slow circles, trying to find the tent. I knew it was only a 5-minute walk. It had always been, but it wasn't there. Only more trees. I stopped, heart thudding hard in my chest, and called out, "Dad?" No answer. "Dad!" A crackle of movement to my left. I spun toward the sound. "Josh." Dad's voice, but it sounded off, hollow, like it had bounced through a dozen mouths before reaching me. Then Dad's real voice, far behind me. "Josh." I turned again, toward the real one, and sprinted back. When I finally saw him standing in the clearing, his face was pale. His eyes scanned the trees behind me. "You okay?" he asked. I nodded, panting. "What happened?" I got turned around. He nodded slowly, jaw clenched. "Let's stay close for a while." That night, we didn't build a fire. Dad said we didn't need one, that it was still warm out. But I knew the truth. Fire meant light. Light meant visibility. Visibility meant something might see us. We sat in silence in front of the cold fire pit, listening. There were footsteps again, but this time they didn't circle. They stopped behind the tent and waited. Dad and I just looked at each other in the dark. I couldn't see his eyes, but I could hear his breathing. Fast, shallow. A long time passed. Then a sound like something heavy leaning against the nylon, just for a second. Then nothing. We stayed awake the whole night. Neither of us said a word. The woods didn't feel like woods anymore. They felt like a mouth, and we were camping inside its throat. The morning after the thing pressed against the tent, Dad looked different. He still smiled, but his smile was tired, tight. His hands trembled when he poured his coffee, and he didn't mention it. Neither did I. We were both pretending we hadn't heard it breathe. We spent the day around the half-built cottage again. Dad worked in silence. I wandered like a ghost. I didn't go far. Not after what I'd heard last night. Not after what I'd felt on the other side of the tent wall. Heat, breath, weight. Like something huge and wrong had leaned in just to feel us through the fabric. Around noon, I heard someone calling my name from the woods again. But this time, it was my own voice. Not Dad's, not a stranger's. Mine. "Dad," it called, in my exact pitch, with my exact panic. "Dad, where are you?" It was coming from the tree line, 40 feet away, not moving closer, just repeating, "Dad, please, where are you?" Like I'd gotten lost in the woods, like I didn't know where I was. I stood frozen with a screwdriver in my hand, staring toward the trees. The thing out there didn't know I was watching it. It just kept repeating that phrase over and over. My voice again and again, each time slightly off, like someone trying to sound human, but forgetting how emotion works. Then I saw movement, not an animal, not a person. It was tall, bent at the middle, its joints jerking too quickly as it ducked behind a tree. I don't remember dropping the screwdriver, just running, straight into Dad, who grabbed my shoulders. "What happened?" he asked, eyes wide. I just shook my head. We didn't go back out after that, not that day, not even to piss. We stayed inside the unfinished cottage until the sun started to set. And then Dad said something I'll never forget. "Something is out here, kiddo." I thought maybe a moose or bear was sniffing around, but this. Hearing the uncertainty in my dad's voice was almost as unsettling as hearing my own voice from the woods. The man knew everything. That night, back at the tent, I noticed something new. A smell, faint but metallic, like rust and wet pennies, and something meaty underneath. Not rotted, fresh. I looked around for an animal carcass or blood in the leaves, found nothing. But that smell stayed with us. It followed us. That's when we heard it again. Not footsteps this time, not breathing, but the sound of our own voices talking to each other just a few feet away. Laughter, conversation, me saying, "Hey Dad, check this out." My chest tightened. I pressed my ear to the tent wall, and just beyond it, I heard it whisper in my voice, "Let me in." I almost screamed. Dad just unzipped the tent, fast and quiet, flashlight in hand. But there was nothing there. Only our cooler was open, lid dangling, contents spilled into the dirt. The eggs were broken. The bread was torn apart. But the meat was gone. No claw marks, no teeth marks, just taken and smeared into the lid of the cooler. Written in something thick and dark was a word I didn't understand. Watching. We packed in silence. No fire, no breakfast, no coffee. Just the snap and zip of tent poles and nylon as we broke down the campsite with shaking hands. The morning air was sharp, colder than the others, and the smell, that meaty, coppery smell, lingered like fog. Neither of us said the word. Skinwalker. We didn't need to. Dad kept glancing over his shoulder as we moved. I didn't even pretend not to be afraid anymore. The voices, the cooler, the mimicry, whatever was in those woods didn't want us to leave. But we were leaving anyway. We shoved the tent and gear into the back of Dad's minivan, slammed the doors shut, The woods were too quiet. No birds, no bugs. Even the wind was still. Dad sat behind the wheel, key ready. He paused. "You buckled in?" he asked. I nodded. He turned the key. The engine roared to life. A moment of relief, brief, fragile. He threw it into reverse and tapped the gas. The van didn't move. He frowned, checked the brake, tried again. The engine revved. Still no movement. I looked out the window. My heart stopped. The wheels weren't on the dirt trail anymore. They were sunk. The tires were half buried in thick, dark mud. Mud we hadn't parked on. Mud that hadn't been there yesterday. Like something had softened the ground beneath us overnight. Like it had known. Dad cursed under his breath and jumped out. Tried to wedge sticks under the tires. I could hear him muttering, trying not to panic. Bullshit. No way this happened on its own. He tried again. The tires spun. The van shuddered. No luck. He gave me a look through the windshield. We were trapped. The tent, half packed, lying crumpled like a dead body. Dad stared at it for a long minute, jaw clenched. Then he muttered, "Screw it," turned on his heel, and marched to the van. I followed, too tired to ask questions. The wheels were still sunk deep in the earth, mud caked up around the axles. It should have been hopeless. But Dad was done playing fair. He jammed branches under the tires again, grabbed a coil of cable from the back, hooked it to a tree stump behind us, and tried to crank leverage with a ratchet system he half invented on the spot. His hands moved with angry purpose, the way they did when he fixed a fuse box or rewired a panel. I saw the stubborn firelight back up in his eyes. It took hours. The sun was low when the tires finally jerked free, spitting mud like blood from a wound. The van lurched back, free. We both let out a gasp that turned into laughter. The first real laugh in days. It didn't last long. Dad gunned the engine, slamming the door as I buckled in. He didn't wait. We roared down the dirt road like it was chasing us, which, deep down, I knew it was. I stared out the window. Trees whipped past, branches blurred. The forest leaned in tighter, shadows long and unnatural in the dusk. It didn't feel like escape. It felt like we were being allowed to run. The van fishtailed once as we hit the gravel lot near the edge of the logging road, and then the blessed cracked ribbon of asphalt. The highway. Dad whooped. I let out a breath I hadn't realized I'd been holding since the first night. We were going home. I watched the trees disappear behind us, swallowed by distance. "We're good," Dad said, breathing hard. "We're gonna make it." I wanted to believe him. I really did. But then I saw it, through the side mirror. A shape broke the tree line behind us. Tall, wrong, running on all fours, but not like an animal. More like a person pretending to be one. Its limbs jerked in horrible rhythm. Too long, too fast. It was gaining. "Dad," I choked. "It's behind us." "What?" Before I could answer, it screamed. The sound shattered through the night like glass breaking inside my skull, high-pitched, warbling, like something dying and laughing all at once. I clapped my hands over my ears. Dad looked in the rear view, face going pale. "Oh my God." The thing slammed into the back of the van. We jolted forward. Tools clattered and crashed in the back. The whole frame groaned. I screamed. Dad floored it, the speedometer needle shaking. But it wasn't gone. It darted along the shoulder, matching our speed. I saw it through the window now, its face flickering between something almost human and a nightmare stretched thin. Eyes hollow, skin like stretched leather, crawling with black veins. It let out another scream and smashed its body into the side of the van, denting the metal. The vehicle swerved, tires screeching. Dad fought the wheel, yelling through gritted teeth. "Hold on." Another impact, this time from above. The roof caved slightly, something dragging claws across it. I could hear it snarling, hear the scrape of its nails like knives on metal. Then the windshield cracked, just a hairline, but enough to make my heart stop. We hit the curve too fast. The van spun, tires skidding on wet pavement. I saw trees, then sky, then ground. A sickening weightlessness grabbed me, and then everything flipped. We crashed through the guardrail. The world exploded in green and brown and screaming steel. Branches breaking, metal twisting. The deafening crunch as the nose hit earth. Silence. Then pain, burning across my chest and arms. A loud ringing in my ears. The smell of gasoline. I hung sideways in my seat, upside down, head bleeding, arms limp. "Dad," I croaked. "Dad." He didn't answer, but something outside the shattered windshield did. It was crawling slowly toward us, dragging one twisted limb behind it, its face half my father's and half mine. Like it hadn't chosen which one of us it wanted to be yet, and it was still deciding. Everything was upside down. My thoughts, the world, my body. I came to in the shattered husk of the minivan, my legs tangled in the seatbelt, blood pooling at my temple. Smoke burned my lungs. The airbag had gone off and deflated, crumpled like a dead jellyfish against the dash. I could smell leaking gas. I turned my head. Pain lanced through my neck. "Dad," I croaked. No answer. The windshield was gone, just jagged teeth of glass. The hood was curled upward like a peeled tin can, and through the smoke and steam rising from the wreck, I saw movement. Outside. It was out there, and so was Dad. I clawed at the seatbelt, unfastened it, and tumbled sideways into the broken door, scraping my ribs on twisted metal. I pulled myself out, dragging one leg behind me. My ankle was wrecked, swollen and hot like it was full of fire. The woods around us were silent, too silent. Then I heard a noise behind the van, wet, violent, the sound of something eating. I limped around the side, chest heaving. I saw my dad. He was on his back against the rear bumper, legs twitching, his arm raised not in defense, but reaching toward me. Something was crouched over him, half naked, its bones moving under waxy flesh, like snakes beneath a tarp. It turned its head toward me without standing. Its face was long and stretched, the eyes too wide apart, too black. It was wearing my dad's voice. "Run, Josh," it gurgled through bloody teeth. "Run, buddy, run." Then it screamed, not in pain, in something worse. A high-pitched shriek that was eager, hungry. I didn't think. I turned and ran. Each step was a scream in my ankle, but adrenaline drowned the pain. I ran into the trees down the hill, branches whipping at my face, the forest folding in around me like it wanted to hide me or swallow me whole. Far behind me, I heard something metallic slam. Then, boom. The explosion lit the night orange. Shrapnel and glass rained from the sky like metal hail. I lay there, chest heaving, heart exploding in my ears. No more screaming, no more chasing, just silence. I pulled myself to my feet, eyes blurry with tears, and hobbled deeper into the trees. I must have blacked out at some point. I remember crawling through leaves, brushing spiders off my arms. The pain in my ankle was dull now, distant, like it had moved into another body. I couldn't feel the tips of my fingers. I was shivering even though I was sweating. And then I heard it. "Josh!" It echoed through the trees. "Josh, hey buddy, I'm here." I stopped cold. That voice, it sounded like Dad, but it couldn't be. I'd heard him scream. I'd heard the explosion. Still, I turned, and he stepped out from between the trees. He was limping, covered in soot, blood crusted on his face and arms. His clothes were half burned, his knuckles raw, but his eyes were Dad's. I didn't know what to say. He came closer and pulled me into a hug, trembling. "Oh, thank God. I thought you were dead." I didn't hug him back at first. I just stood there, stiff as a plank. "How did you survive?" I finally whispered. He paused. Then, "I got out, right before the tank blew. But I saw. It's okay. I'm here." He grinned like he always did, a crooked dad grin, and I wanted to believe him so badly it made me dizzy. We walked through the thinning trees until the highway reappeared, empty and endless. It looked like salvation. Then, movement in the ditch up ahead. A large brown bear. It lumbered out onto the pavement, shoulders heaving, nose sniffing the air. I grabbed Dad's arm. "We need to hide." He stood still. The bear turned. It saw us. It charged. My heart stopped. I tried to move, to scream, but my legs gave out. Then Dad stepped forward. He didn't run. He changed. His back hunched, bones cracking audibly. His skin crawled, stretching too tight across his frame. His mouth unhinged, splitting wide in a jagged V that reached his ears. And then he roared, this inhuman gurgling sound that made my stomach twist. The bear skidded in the gravel, tried to turn. Too late. The thing that had been my father leapt onto it, claws tearing into fur. The bear screamed once, then silence. Blood hit the pavement like spilled paint. And then he turned back. I watched the change happen in reverse. Bones sliding into place, skin smoothing like hot wax. He looked at me. "Told you I'd keep you safe."